And welcome everybody who's watching this later or coming in a little bit later. It's our weekly imagination session. So it's been so much fun to see what we can be imagining here a little bit. Just a quick logistical reminder. We have these scheduled through May and then some in June, but starting in June, I'm reducing them to 60 minutes instead of 75. I just got some feedback, and that seems like that would work a little bit better for schedule. And so we'll do that in June. We will not do them in July. We have a whole year's worth of a library that if students need to tap into some, they can back up and grab some of those at that point and hopefully resume in August. I'm having a little more difficulty recruiting some of my faculty colleagues over the summer months. So we'll see what we can line up. But doesn't always have to be them. I am pleased today to introduce Andrew Hollingsworth. Andrew is one of our newer faculty mentors, and we're still getting to know one another, but he is brilliant and in many fields. My goodness, is what this guy knows is pretty incredible. And I
Almost
love
certainly untrue.
And now I'm setting you up here pretty good, but now with a fascinating topic for today, one of the things that we do need to talk about, whether we're in ministry as professionals or whether we're participating in the life of the church, we are participating in the life of the world, and digital technology is impacting nearly everything we do. So, Andrew, without me, you feel free to introduce yourself more fully, but
Mhm.
um, this is your opportunity. Lead us where we ought to go today.
Cool. Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Awesome. As Tony said, I'm Dr. Andrew Hollingsworth. A little bit about myself. In addition to being an affiliate professor with Kairos University, I am a priest in what is called the Evangelical Episcopal Communion. Additionally, licensed as a missionary priest through the Kagera Diocese of the Anglican Church of Tanzania. So as my granddad calls me, I'm one of those crypto Catholics. I'm an Anglican priest, and I pastor a church plant that God called us to start here in Mandeville, Louisiana. This month makes a year ago. We're like a mega church. We have 6 people, including the 3 that live in my house. So about to have a seventh. We are growing. We're seeing slow growth, but God is blessing it. And um, I've just discovered church planting is very different. I never intended to be a pastor, much less a church planter. Hence, I never did an MDiv. I did an MA in theology, concentrating in philosophy of religion at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, where I stayed for my THM and my PhD in systematic theology, researching in theological method. After doing theological method throughout most of my graduate studies and then all of my doctoral work, and then a couple of years after that, I decided I was tired of talking about theology, and I wanted to start doing theology. So I spent several years researching the doctrine of God, divine attributes, and the Trinity in particular. It's where most of my research has been published on the Trinity. Just had an article come out in Journal of Theological Studies on that. So that was exciting. Kind of checked off a bucket list item to get published in that journal. Um, got a couple of other writing projects I'm working on the Trinity as well. Um, oh, and I'm also a canon theologian for our missional society here, Missio Mosaic Missional Society. We're an interdenominational um, missional society of church planters, chaplains, pastors. We have a missional lead who happens to also be the bishop. I answer to a missionary bishop. But even though he is Anglican and some of us are Anglicans, we have Baptist, Methodists all under this missional society under his leadership, which has been really cool. We actually have a cohort with Kairos University we're developing an MA for. So that'll be exciting. And yeah, I love to teach. And one of the things I've been fascinated about is ever since I left full-time academia to go into church planting, that was God's decision, not mine. I have not done any less theology or philosophy. My context has just shifted in how I do it. So that's been a wonderful blessing. But today, my presentation is on nothing that I am an expert in. As a matter of fact, I'll be the first to tell you I'm not an expert on this. Uh, as I get older, I'm just becoming grumpier, I suppose. Well, maybe not grumpier, but I'm just starting to rethink a lot of things that I have taken for granted in my life that I have just assumed was fine. It's just the norm and the way to go. And I want to share those things with y'all, and I want y'all to this is an invitation to think with me. This presentation, this is not an official research presentation I'm looking to present anywhere or publish, at least not anytime soon. These are my attempts to organize and formalize some of my thoughts about what I see a particular challenge to contemporary Christianity, especially here in the West. So I'm going to be contextualizing a good bit I'm talking about. I don't see this problem in a lot of majority world countries where they may not be as technologically developed as we are. I don't see some of these challenges posed there. And I think they actually might be for the better for it, as you're going to see in some of what I want to talk about today. But today I want to about kingdom mission, what I think the mission of the kingdom is. I think I've changed the title several times. The current title, the second term, is digital media, not electronic media, but digital media. And what I believe is the prophetic voice of Neil Postman. So I am going to, if it's okay, share my screen from my PowerPoint. Can everyone see this?
We
Cool.
can. Thank you.
Awesome.
Yes.
So, oh, all right, I guess I have to click instead there. So I I have developed a concern after reading thinkers such as Neil Postman, and another thinker that's influenced me a lot on these topics is Wendell Berry. If you've not gotten a chance to read him, I highly recommend his small collection of essays, What Are People For? Um, Excellent collection of essays. I was required by a professor in undergraduate to read those, and I find Wendell Berry to be a lot more like a contemporary C.S. Lewis in many ways. He's just one of those guys that it seems almost very straightforward and simplistic when you read it, but then decades later you find yourself keep coming back to it and just drinking from the well of the richness of it that's there. So, as we know all too well here in the 21st century, we live in what Postman in the 90s was already calling a technocracy. That means we live in a society and a culture that is being dominated by technologies, and that was in the 90s, and it's now moved into more that he argued then what's called a technopoly. And part of what this means is that we live in a day and age where it's almost inconceivable to go about life without relying on some sort of newer technology for basic aspects of living life, whether it's work, whether it's leisure or entertainment. We live in a day and age where almost the thought of uh, doing it so without technology is almost inconceivable. And I want y'all to just think about one little thing. How many of you have ever heard the investment advice? Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Right? That's a very, and not just with investments, that's just in general a pretty imprudent thing to do, right? I want y'all to think about something. What do y'all think would happen if the internet went down indefinitely around the world like this? What do y'all think would happen? I I think we would see a massive loss of jobs. We would see economies plummet. We would see issues in the hospital systems, people's ability to get care and treatment with some areas. A lot of bad things would happen if this one man-made thing, went down indefinitely. And as I have reflected on that, I have realized that is putting all of our eggs in a basket in a way. And it doesn't seem like it's been very prudent of us to do so. Now, we've seen this in the world, and I think we've done this with a lot of technology, a lot of digital technology specifically. That word technology can mean a lot of things, right? The wheel is a kind of technology. So I'm not talking about all, I'm talking specifically about digital media and digital technology. Not only do we see us kind of throwing all of our eggs into some baskets with this around the world for so many different areas of our life, but I think the church has just followed suit in doing that. And I don't think sometimes we have taken the time to take a step back and critically analyze what it is we're doing with that. So, and I think we have actually now done so with in trying to use digital technologies in our kingdom mission in ways that might not be the most helpful. Now, before I get too forward, do not hear me say digital technologies are bad or that they are evil or anything like that. Like any tool, digital technology and media is a tool. It is neither good nor evil. It has no moral value, but it has a proper place. And that's what I want us to think about today is the proper place of digital media in kingdom mission. One of my key examples is my vacuum cleaner is a wonderful piece of technology for vacuuming my carpet. It's a terrible piece of technology for cutting my grass. And so I want us to think in terms like that. So when I'm thinking about the church's proper use of digital media and technology, I'm not asking is technology bad or is digital media bad or good, but I'm asking what is the proper place, the proper order of it in kingdom mission. Well, I tend to like to, in terms of kingdom mission, there's all kinds of different features or aspects to kingdom mission. I'm going to focus specifically on the cultivation of discipleship. I think part and parcel of the kingdom mission is the cultivating of disciples into the image of King Jesus. Now, as one of the books that have influenced my view on discipleship, and pretty much helped me to make the case that Christian education and discipleship are one and the same, is this very helpful book by Norman Klassen and Dean Zimmerman called The Passionate Intellect, Incarnational Humanism and the Future of University Education. This is a little bit older book. This came out in 2006, so sadly to say in 20 years it's already quite dated, but I think there's a lot of good principles in that. One of the goals in discipleship, in our case, Christian education, is getting disciples to image their masters. That's what the goal is. So a student in the ancient world would disciple under a master or a teacher, and they would seek to emulate them, how they prayed, how they thought, how they taught, not specifically what they believed, but how they believed. Because we see, for example, Paul goes and studies under Gamaliel, but Paul clearly is not a Hillelite Jew. He's clearly his behaviors fit the pattern of Shammai Jew, school of Pharisaism, not the Hillel school of Pharisaism or rabbinism, but yeah, of the rabbinic traditions than that Gamaliel had. Like Gamaliel is very much a live and let live kind of guy. Paul is not. And that's because even in the ancient world, it was still somewhat common to go and study under someone because of their notoriety. And Gamaliel was someone of well note. But for us, our master is Jesus. And so the goal of discipleship, as we are disciples of Jesus, is to image our master. But we can't do that without thinking about what I call Jesus' little masters. And that were the 12 disciples. Because again, the 12 that were in his circle, he was cultivating to image him and to be like him in the world. They all took disciples to image them. And so on down the chain, the goal is that through this chain of discipleship, as it's handed down, the goal is ultimately to image Jesus. But I think more so today that what the role of pastors are doing is that we seek to imitate those who have taught us to image Jesus, those whom we are investing in. We want them to some extent to image us for the purpose of imaging Jesus. So that puts a very heavy responsibility on our shoulders. We need to make sure that we are imaging Jesus as we have seen handed down in the writings of the apostles and through the history of the church, and we've seen that today. Specifically, when it comes to cult to imaging Jesus and to being discipled, we think a lot about character and virtue, and I think that's right. I think virtue cultivation and character development are two of the most important aspects of Christian discipleship. Most of Jesus' teachings were not erudite or esoteric lectures on the Trinity. Rather, they are things like the Sermon on the Mount, where we are instructed what it looks like to be true lovers of the law and to truly live out the law of God. Jesus reduces the law, in some extent, to the love of God and the love of neighbor. We could say that these are the two highest Christian virtues, though I think we could add plenty more, namely the fruits of the Spirit, such as patience and long suffering and joy and gentleness and kindness. There's lots of Christian virtues that we are given to emulate, that we will emulate if we are being discipled well into the image of Jesus. And that comes into the area of theology to some extent. We know God, we want to know God in order to love God. And we want to, and likewise, if we're going to love our neighbor as ourselves, that means we need to know our neighbor in order to properly love our neighbor. Last, I think an important consideration for us to think about as we are being discipled. I got this idea from Wolfhart Pannenberg and from a pupil of his, Stanley Grins. The idea is living as new creations, the idea that we are new creations in community. One of the teachings that Pannenberg was very well known for in his systematic theology, as well as all of his writings, was this idea that the future exerts a retroactive determining effect on the present, not in the sense of causal determination, in the sense like we would say it infringes on free will, but it is the idea that the end determines and identifies, constitutes, if you will, the middle and the beginning. Consider the Lord of the Rings. Who is the hero of the Lord of the Rings? It's Samwise Gamgee, of course. Sam is the hero of Lord of the Rings. He's the one that carries Frodo up the mountain. He is the one that does all of these things. Sam's the hero. But what makes Sam the hero? What determines him as the hero of the story? It's the end of the story. It's the end. It's when those things at the end happen. They retroactively don't just illuminate, but they decide or determine the meaning and the significance of everything Sam did up to those points. Does that make sense? It has this retro, because think about what would have happened. Suppose Smeagol took the ring and it never ended up in the, which he does, but it never ends up into the fires of Mount Doom. Sam's not the hero anymore because the story didn't conclude the same way. It's this event that has a retroactive determining effect as to what was really happening in the rest of his life. Now, what does this mean for Christian theology and eschatology and discipleship? It's this idea that I get from that Stanley Grins put it in these words: we are who we will be. And I think this is a very real sense that helps us to think about what it means to emulate Jesus. If we were to close our eyes for a second and just imagine who we would be in the new creation, in the resurrection with our Lord, well, that's going to have a determining effect on who we are today and what happens today. Because if there's one thing I've learned from thinkers such as N.T. Wright and Pannenberg and so many others, um, there's not this strict cutoff of discontinuity between who I will be in the future and who I am now. No, what I do in the present matters for who I am in the future, but it's who I am in the future that determines the true significance of what I do now, has this retroactive effect on that. And if we think about who we will be in the future as new creations in the resurrection, I think that has a tremendously powerful illuminating effect on how we live our lives in trying to be disciples of Jesus. What does it mean to live in the kingdom? Because what do we imagine the new creation will be like? And I think that should help, it should impact us so that if we are new creations, then we need to get on with living as new creations. In other words, if I'm doing some kind of behavior in the here and now, but if I can think about it for a second, like, oh yeah, I'm quite certain I won't be doing that in the kingdom of God. Well, maybe I shouldn't be doing that now, from a moral perspective at least. Does that make sense? Are y'all following that idea? It's kind of a hard principle to get on board with, but I think that matters. And this idea as new creations and community, the idea that we are who we will be and who we will be should have a kind of determining effect on who we are today, is going to pop up again. So if that's the goal of kingdom mission, is to make disciples of Jesus. If that's our ultimate goal, whether we're pastors, missionaries, professors, theologians, philosophers, social critics, sociologists, like whatever we are, if our goal ultimately is kingdom mission and the cultivation of disciples into the kingdom of Jesus, then I think that should impact how we think about everything, including electronic media and digital media. Now, this is the primary book I'm going to be referencing by Postman today. It's called Amusing Ourselves to Death. Postman wrote this in the mid 80s. It's on public discourse in the age of show business. He wrote another fantastic book that's influenced me a lot on this called Technopoly. Great book. I recommend it. But if you want to get the gist of what Postman's at, this is probably the place to start. A little bit of background on Neil Postman. Neil Postman, I'm not quite honestly sure if he was just an agnostic or if he was a Christian in some sense of the word. He has things that seem quite friendly towards Christianity at times, but he was a social critic. He had a doctorate of education. He was at Princeton or Yale. I forget where he was at. But he was primarily a social critic. And this book, it's not this lengthy treatise on philosophy that interacts with a lot of philosophy at points. But he's taking on the role of a social critic. And in this book, he's reflecting on the role the television has had and the impact that television specifically has had on culture. Specifically, he notes one thing that you could see already into the 70s that really was the case in the 80s. And it's something that seems subtle, but I think the significance of it is more profound than we realize. Once upon a time, the living room of a house or a family room, some people call it, or a den, if you're like me from the middle of nowhere, Mississippi, the den, the couches, the chairs, they were organized in such a way, almost like a square or a rectangle, where you had seats facing each other for the purpose of conversation around the room. Um, that was the norm for the longest time in many ways. But starting in the 70s, with the advent of the television earlier in the 60s, something happens. The television now becomes the centerpiece of the family room. Now, that doesn't seem all that significant, but it's actually quite significant. Because here's one of the implications: the attention is no longer on each other, the attention is now on the box, it's now on the screen. And that actually had a tremendous impact, not just on family life and the ideas of entertainment. It begins to impact a lot of things, specifically politics. Postman recounts in the earlier chapters of the book how once upon a time, political debates, presidential debates, were quite lengthy. When you look at the presidential debate for Abraham Lincoln, I can't remember if it's his first or his second, it was around 3 to 4 hours. The presidential debate was. The opening statements alone took over an hour to deliver. Now, the whole thing has to be done in an hour, usually under an hour to allow for commercial breaks. Well, what happened on that? What changed? Video programming changed. Because what happened with the television is a lot of things happened. One, people started. We see where there were movies at the beginning. I'm a big movie fan, and movies tend to be 1, 2, 3 hour long things, 3.5 hours if you're watching Gone with the Wind, the first movie in color, if I remember correctly. But then we start seeing the advent of the television show, of programming, where you have more bite-sized things, things that only lasted maybe an hour, maybe 30 minutes. You start to see things where the medium starts becoming more conducive to shorter spurts of bits. Something else happened in this time. The news was no longer something people looked to for something to learn about current affairs. Now the news itself began to be shaped by this concept of television entertainment. And now the news started to enter more into the entertainment realm as well. And a lot of this was because there was a kind of conditioning happening with the centrality of the TV and with the idea of entertainment programming on the television. Now, when we get to the 1960s, there is the first televised, I think it's the 60s, the first televised presidential debate between JFK and Richard Nixon. And if anyone was alive back then, or if not, you can just go look it up. Um, Nixon got destroyed. A couple of things played into that. One, he wasn't feeling all that well. But number two was he was not a likable TV character. JFK, on the other hand, was tall, slim, trim, good hair, good looking guy, well poised, very articulate, had a good smile. Nixon was none of those things. Now, why does that matter? Because in television they typically get the most beautiful people to play the roles. In entertainment, they typically get the more beautiful people, the more smooth cat, if you will, to play the roles of the hero, of the protagonist, and such. Nothing about Richard Nixon struck people as a protagonist. Once upon a time, Postman points out that we had people like William Howard Taft, who famously got stuck in a bathtub for being so overweight, who once were presidents, and now that's almost inconceivable. Now, what we expect out of someone we see on the television has actually been more shaped by television entertainment than we realize. And Postman points to this, and I forget the name of the guy he gets the phrase from, but he builds off this phrase he gets from someone he's influenced by called the medium is the message. See, up to this point, we were thinking about televisions as this neutral medium of discourse, or this medium of information. But it's not quite that simple. While there may not be any inherent moral value to technology or to tools, there are certain constraints with them. They're good for some things and not for others. And what's pointed out is that the medium is the message, and that means the medium isn't just a way that a message is given, but the medium takes on a role in shaping the message, is what happens. It starts to determine what you can and cannot say and how you can and cannot say it in some ways. Postman extends this and he calls it the medium as the metaphor because Postman has this idea that all mediums of communication are a kind of metaphor. We learn by speaking, we learn by seeing, and all these kinds of things. And he talks about also how information mediums actually impact epistemology, how we know and what we can know, because they start shaping how the discourse can work. If you want to learn about how discourse and signs and symbols and language and all that works, look no further than St. Augustine and his wonderful dialogue on the teacher, or just in on Christian doctrine. You can look there for some of that. But the signs we use and the context we use them in matter and play a more determinative role in what we want to say and what we want to accomplish. Now, Postman died before social media really hit its stride and became what it is today. Again, he wrote this in the mid 80s. This is a 20th anniversary edition, or I think 20, yeah, 20th. So this came out in 2006. And it actually has a forward by Postman's son in it, which is really interesting. Who he talks about, we were already seeing things like the cell phone and MySpace was starting to become a thing, and Zanga, uh, and all these different kinds of social media were becoming ever more popular. But I think there's a lot of what Postman was talking about, and one of the things Postman gets at in this book, I forgot to mention this, is that while television and things like that, and he is specifically concerned about the news. The news is a medium, televised news as mediums of information and public discourse. What Postman concludes is that, hey, television there are things that it's great for, like mindless entertainment, movies, but there's also some things that it's terrible for. One of those is transfer of information and the shaping of public discourse. Because what has happened is because the entertainment aspect of television has started to impact and influence how we view all kinds of things. Well, now look at how news media companies function now. Ratings. What gets the ratings higher? Well, ultimately, people vote on entertainment value more than anything else. Not necessarily where they're how much truth or much falsity or how much you agree or disagree, but entertainment value. The more gotcha journalism there is, the higher ratings go up. Things like that matter. How good the news anchors looked. I mean, how many times have we seen this common cultural trope of the beautiful weather girl, right? I mean, how many times have we heard that in movies and television? Because what people see, again, something about the medium is shaping how we're getting the information and what we want and what we're willing to listen to. So Postman actually makes some cases that, hey, maybe television isn't as good as the printed word, that the printed word is actually better for things like public discourse, things like newspapers as opposed to televised news, and so forth. Now, I think there's a lot of insights that Postman has in this book just about television and public discourse in the world of showbiz that has become even more obvious to us today in light of social media. Today, it's almost common parlance to talk about Facebook friends and online communities. Um, but as you can see, for the most part, typically, a lot of the people we are friends with on Facebook, we've never met in person. It's not quite obvious what it means to call that person a friend. And I just don't even know what an online community is outside of an interest group. I have a cousin of mine who she's 24 years old, and her three best friends, only one of them does she know their real name. The other two she only knows by screen name. That's something bizarre to me. Also, not only does it shape how we what we think about, but take a step back, that's more significant than just a name. Because actually, I can tell you lots of people who I catch in my own daily discussion. Someone say, "Oh, hey, do you know so and so?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, I'm friends with them." "Oh yeah, where'd you meet them?" "Oh well, I'm friends with them on Facebook." It started to impact how I think about what a friend is. because we start associating that word and it starts playing over and over in our minds with how we start approaching these things. Online communities, when we start to talk to people, oh, who's your community? Oh, well, I've got a pretty good crew over on Reddit. We see things like that all the time. We see Facebook groups popping up all over the place where people are trying to find community through these ways. Whether or not they're actual communities, we can talk about later. But also, social media has shaped something else about public discourse. With Twitter, we see that we have things like say what you need to say in 280 characters or less. In other words, there is this innate message being distilled to us that longer forms of discourse aren't as valuable. Give me the elevator pitch. That's all I need to know. Just give me the highlights. I don't need any other details. That impacts how we think about public discourse, how we think about when we read books, when we think about how the kind of content that we consume. These things shape this behaviorally more than we realize. What do we look for to entertainment? We no longer seldom do we. In my own self, I've yet to see the new movie The Batman because it's a long movie. It's easier for me to sit on my phone and look at pictures of food and memes. Something that's just almost instant, something that requires no attention span, something that doesn't require much emotional or intellectual investment in me. And then similarly, okay, that's a neat idea, but can you explain it to me like in a TikTok video? Something short and bite-sized. Now, I think we can see how more obviously than even with television, these aspects of social media are impacting public discourse. Go on TikTok and just try and look up people talking about the problem of evil, and it'll just befuddle you as to how people can just reduce something so simplistically and ignore all of the nuance that has gone on for centuries in these discussions because the medium is shaping the discourse. Not only is it shaping the discourse, but with the advent of things like the like, the follows, the subscribes, and the dopamine hits that psychologists talk about that we get from those things, well, now it's not about just the information you communicate, but were you smiling enough? Did you have the right backdrop? Did you have the right intro? All these things impact likes. One of the reasons I'm talking into this Yeti microphone is because as I was getting ready to do a podcast for my own church to where I could turn some of my lectures and stuff into podcasts for church members so they could have additional teaching content, I'm reading online. If the sound quality or the video quality on a podcast is low, people just won't watch it. The medium is more than a medium. The medium becomes the message. It becomes the metaphor, as Postman would say. But also, I think digital media has had a terrible impact overall on character formation. And I think Postman would agree. He was talking about this already with the television. I think we see it more on social media. I think what we have seen a lot with digital media and with social media in particular is consumer mentality at its worst. I said worst. That should be a T, not an E. Don't hold it against me that I advise doctoral students and can't spell. I'm better at talking about whether or not letters are real than what to do with them. But I think this is what it does because again, as I talked with the like things. Okay, well now people will completely change their backdrop. They will change their whole demeanor. They'll change what they talk about if they think it gets them more likes. And with the way the algorithms work to put content in front of people's minds like it does now, again, social media, you can watch the documentaries on it. When the guys at Facebook sat down to lay out the idea and start putting together the plan that is now Facebook, one of the first questions they talked about was, okay, question number one, how do we get people on it? Number two, how do we keep them on it? Enter the algorithms to constantly putting things in front of us that are going to keep us hooked in and keep us baited on. Television, again, with commercials and stuff, the people on television and stuff like that were already doing that. You can see that also happens in the news culture. They do things on the news. They present themselves in certain ways. They even give information in certain kinds of ways to keep us watching. The more we watch, the higher their ratings go up, the more money they make. It's it goes hand in hand with consumer mentality. As I'm going to say in a little bit, it's not so much that these mediums are evil. I'm not saying that at all. But when you couple them with non-Christian worldviews, I think we're looking at a recipe for disaster. One of the things digital media has hit us more with is with this tendency of cultivating convenience rather than character. Again, think of how many times we make decisions because it's simply more convenient. That goes hand in hand with the next point of buying into what commonly gets referred to as the virtue of efficiency. Uh, I'm a philosopher as much as I am a theologian. I read the Bible a lot. I know you've all read the Bible a lot. I've read the classical philosophers, just about all of them. Guess what's never listed as a virtue in any of the scripture or in any of the classical philosophers? Efficiency. You see, that's one of the things that's interesting about technology in general and electronic and digital technology in particular, is they're meant to make our lives more expedited, to help us move things along quicker, to make them more convenient. Oh, with the dawn of the internet, the research it would take me for this chapter I'm writing, oh, well, that would have taken me months. Now I can do it in just a week. And I've got all this time freed up. But let me ask a question. Convenient to what end? I think that's a question we don't typically think about when we think about, well, we use these media and stuff for more convenience and for efficiency. To what end? Are we being convenient? Are we seeking convenience and efficiency for the sake of being further cultivated into the image of Christ, for the more production of spiritual fruit, for the work of the kingdom in the world? Is it, as I'm more prone to do, to be a fat cat laid up on the couch watching whatever podcast, Tom Holland's podcast or whatever I'm watching on YouTube? Or is it something actually else happen, which I think is more sinister? And I think this is where we see kind of the devil getting into some of this. What typically happens is we've tried to use technologies and digital technology in particular to expedite certain tasks to where that frees up our time. But did we really get time freed up? Well, we didn't, because now our supervisor said, oh, well, now that you've got all this extra time, I expect double the work production in half the time. That's what happened. And now we've got so many things on our plates. It's not a coincidence that it's at the peak of digital entertainment, of digital media, and all of these things. That anxiety and stress levels are through the roof. We're seeing record highs of all of these things because the technologies that were meant to free us from additional labor have actually just further enslaved us into a grind and work hard nonstop mentality. Is what's happened. And that's led me to think about character formation and discipleship after being amused to death. Are y'all able to kind of see where I'm going with some of this, of how it's impacted these things and these trends with behavior? As I'm thinking about this, as I'm reading Postman and guys like Wendell Berry, I'm thinking about, well, what does this mean if I've been being amused to death for the last 20 years? I'm 35. I've been on social. I didn't get to Facebook until I was a freshman in college, so that's when I was 18 years old, or 17 technically, because I got it before I went into college. So I've had Facebook roughly half my life now. Has the second half of my life, like, what is my discipleship? It's like, have these things cultivated me into a more Christ-like image bearer, or have they stunted that to some extent? Have they hindered that? The things that, even though we thought that we could use it for good, well, actually, maybe it's like trying to use the vacuum cleaner on the yard. It doesn't quite work. It doesn't quite do what it does. So now I want to talk about my third major point, which is digital media kingdom formation and rethinking it all. So let's think about a couple of ways we see digital media and digital technologies being used in some current kingdom ministries. I'm gonna look, there's a lot of different ones. I'm gonna look at just two: local church ministries and Christian universities and seminaries. And yes, I'm aware of the irony of talking about potential problems of digital education as a professor for Kairos University, where we rely a lot on digital technologies. Again, technology is not the problem. Proper place of the technology is what I'm wanting you to think with me about. But in local church ministry, I can't, I don't have a personal Instagram account or anything like that. But I do have one for the church, and I cannot log on to it without seeing a bunch of my local pastors a short clip from their sermon, 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minute at the most, being flipped by. Now, originally these short contents were created to get people to go watch longer videos. The goal was, hey, watch this short, get a taste of what you like, go watch the whole sermon on YouTube. That was one of the purposes of shorts and stuff like that. But guess what the data suggests? That doesn't happen. Go look at the views of a short on YouTube, and then go look at the number of views on the full video from which the short was pulled. it's oftentimes 5 to 6 times higher on the short than it is on the actual video. I've seen this. I did a podcast interview on the use of a Google Business Profile and the importance of that for church planting, just being visible and on the map. Um, the full video, I think it's gotten like maybe 50 views, but one of the shorts, the guy who shot it from, it's gotten like 284 views in like a week or something like that. I don't remember exactly the number, but it was astronomically higher than the full video. And this is not just a one-off thing. You can consistently find that with almost any content you watch. Go look at Tom Holland's podcast. The same thing. The shorts consistently have more views than the long form content. The one exception to this rule might be Joe Rogan's podcast. I have never seen anything that's 3 to 4 hours long consistently get 8 million views. That is mind blowing to me. Also, you can go look at other data. Most people aren't watching more than 30 to 45 minutes of his podcast, actually. That's an interesting fact. They actually are not making it through the whole episode. I very seldom make it through a Joe Rogan episode. But again, why is that significant? Because people want everything. Hey, okay, but tell it to me like in a TikTok video. It's not actually making them go watch the longer form content. A few people maybe, but not a significant number. Instagram inspirationals. I see sometimes I actually know people who will say, "Oh, I don't go to church that much, but I read a lot of the inspirational things that I see from churches on Instagram." You see, we do things like that to try and be a kind of marketing tool that, oh, if they'll see it, they'll come to our churches and stuff, but they're not doing it. It's actually not translating into church attendance. X marks the spot. I've seen pastors, that's supposed to be a pun because Twitter's now X, so X marks the spot. So so I have seen pastors try and give some of their major sermon points in the form of a Twitter thread, thinking, oh, they'll get a taste of this, they'll come in. Not only is it not getting people in the church, but I think it actually has an opposite effect of what they want. Because the people who they would think that it might inspire to come into the church, they're not seeing it. Who is seeing it? The people the algorithm puts it in front of. But who does the algorithm tend to put things in front of? People who are going to react negatively to it. So actually, what ends up doing is someone will post a sermon point from a Twitter thread or an X thread, whatever you want to call it, and it sparks a fight online rather than gets people into churches. Actually tends to be happening. Social media sometimes feeds the worst of us, and we don't even realize it. What about Christian universities and seminaries? Uh, if we think about when we were in university or seminary, I did my undergrad, I did mine all on campus. The average length of a lecture for a course, if I'm on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class, typically it's like a 35, 40-minute lecture, 10 to 15 minutes of student discussion, Q&A, went to the next one. But again, 35-minute bare minimum, typically. If you're on a Tuesday, Thursday, you're looking at like an hour and 10-minute, hour and 15-minute lecture, 15, 20 minutes of student discussion before you go to your next class, etc. When I was teaching full-time online with Bruton Parker University, we did not have this one. We weren't really encouraged to use Zoom or anything like that. We had to do the pre-recorded lecture thing. Again, that can have a place. We'll talk about that more in a little bit. But the best practices at the time were suggesting that 10 to 12-minute lectures were all students could handle at a time. That is mind-blowing to me. Because when you look at, well, wait a second, they had to be able to sit for 35 minutes minimum in a physical classroom. The best practices for a video lecture was 10 to 12 minutes. It's better to give your students who are watching online, instead of giving them an hour lecture, a 60-minute lecture, break that 60-minute lecture up into 6 10-minute videos. Which, by the way, is a lot more work if you're a content creator. If you're doing that, it's a lot more work to do 6 10-minute small lectures than one long hour lecture. Um, but that tells us something. What is it about this medium that's not letting students get past that? Because they're trailing off, they're not retaining, they're not focusing. Digital words versus printed and written words. There have been studies that suggest that reading an ebook, for whatever reason, people are not retaining the information they read from an ebook or a PDF quite the same way that they do a printed book or handwritten works. They're not as conducive of a medium as people thought they would be. You can't just simply shift the medium without there being an impact or a consequence of some sorts. Also, I think it's resulted in not just Christian education, but higher education in general, to being convenient and commodified. Again, convenient to what end? Oh, I can work on my MD from a distance. I can do it fast, 8-week courses, and I'm done. To what end? When I would teach systematic theology one online in 8 weeks, I would tell my students on day one, I'm sorry, but you're not going to learn everything you need to know about systematic theology one in 8 weeks. You can be a full-time student. This is the only class you're going to take. You're not going to be able to imbibe all that you need to imbibe on these topics within 8 weeks because that's just not how education works. Because if education is discipleship as we here believe, there's just certain things that it just can't happen quickly. Sometimes convenience isn't always the answer. And I say commodified because this goes hand in hand with our consumer mentality that pervades a lot of our culture, is that now higher education is viewed as a commodity. If it doesn't give me what I want, I'll leave your school and I'll go where they do give me what I want. It creates this idea that it's not something sacred. It's not something that's good for the growth of their soul. It's something that's just some other commodity they want, like DirecTV versus Dish or something like that, or Netflix versus Hulu or something like that. And I think we've seen that. I think because digital medias have primarily revolved around entertainment for the longest point, kind of like the television was, they are shaping the discourse. They're shaping what we can do and say and use these technologies for. Again, these are good technologies when used properly and in the right place. So I think these are some negative ways we have seen digital media impact our kingdom efforts, actually. So, what's the solution to that? As I've been thinking through Postman, as I've been thinking through Wendell Berry, I can't help but wonder perhaps it's time for us to start de-digitizing some of our kingdom efforts. Maybe it's time we start, and I've tried to be punny here, so bear with me. Pray for my son and my wife. They deal with this every day. Maybe it's time we weigh out Instagram. Maybe it's a time we start abandoning shorts in a TikTok second. Maybe we start realizing that part of true discipleship is the necessity of embodied communities. That's actually not a pun there. That's just a straight. I didn't know how to turn that into a pun. Retrieving the printed and the written word. If we're seeing data that suggests that, hey, for whatever reason, words on a digital screen aren't sticking as well, then maybe we should start rethinking. I didn't even have time to touch on AI in ministry and how that's pastors just aren't even writing sermons anymore. They're getting AI to write it for them because there's a high uptick of that happening. Um, this is one I thought of particular in regards to church services. No screens, no QR codes. Imagine being able to go into a church service for an hour and a half and to never even need to look at your phone screen or any screen, not even a projector screen, just to be able, like they did in the old days, to hold a hymnal in your hand, a pew Bible in your hand, and go through your worship. Because here's the thing, why does that matter? Because, well, that's a tangent. I'll come back to that one in the Q&A. Remind me to come back to that because that's what I actually am a little bit passionate about. Unplugging from the world to Sabbath with the Master. Again, I think that when we start looking at the increased numbers of anxiety and stress disorders that we are seeing, psychologists and sociologists are telling us, hey, the overconsumption of digital technologies is impacting this more than we realize it is, and they're providing data to back it up. Last, I think we need to realize that sometimes cultivating virtue, especially kingdom virtues, is just inconvenient. Again, we talk about we want things to be convenient, but to be what end? There are certain things like there are certain virtues like patience you can't cultivate quickly or conveniently. Actually, the only way to cultivate patience typically is through dealing with a lot of inconveniences. That's typical. Again, how's that old mantra go? Uh, for goodness sake, don't pray for patience. God's not going to give you patience. He's going to give you the opportunities to practice being patient. And when we look back at what Aristotle tells us in the Nicomachean Ethics, virtues are something that we have to practice. It's not something that we can just come to. We have to practice. We have to practice kindness. We have to practice prudence. We have to practice courage. We have to practice those things in order to cultivate those things. That goes hand in hand with the spiritual disciplines, with character formation, trying to follow Christ. But I also want us to think a little bit about how we might ought to use digital media in Kingdom Mission, because I do think we can use it. I just think we need to rethink how we use it. Again, forgive the strain puns. Zoom in and zoom out. Zoom is way that while I think all of us would agree, hey, there's still benefits you get from a physical classroom that you can't get from a Zoom meeting like this. It's still better than the asynchronous stuff that we had. I can see that in the way I work with all of my students on Zoom. I It's a breath of fresh air. But using Zoom strategically and using Zoom well in our ministries, I think can be good for us. Second, uh, replacing yellow pages with Facebook pages. I'm not saying churches and universities can't use Facebook or social media, but hey, instead of trying to use Facebook to win people, maybe we use it like a yellow page. We put our advertisement there. We do what we need to do to keep the page up, to keep it visible, to keep it in front of people, but that's where we stop it. We're not trying to preach through Facebook. We're not trying to disciple people through Facebook because it doesn't seem like Facebook is the kind of medium that's going to be that good for that. Instead of trying to use Instagram to inspire people and to read their Bible, maybe we try and use Instagram similarly to inspire attendance. Not and we stop doing the shorts. We start just making actual commercials. Hey, we would love for you to come to our church. We can do that with Instagram. Same with YouTubing attention spans. Hey, instead of maybe playing to this habit and trying to give consumers what they want of only 10 to 12-minute lectures, maybe we start actually saying, no, you just need to be able to track with the conversation for an hour because that's actually part and parcel of your discipleship cultivation. That's part of being formed in the image of Jesus. And then last, like I said, watch the short advertisement. Maybe we stop chopping up sermons into shorts, hoping they'll go watch the full sermon, and we start rethinking how to use it. Again, let's just use it like a commercial. That's about what a short is a TV length commercial. So let's do it to advertise what we want people to come and get, not to give them what we want them to get. Does that make sense? So I think these are just ways I'm thinking off the top of my head, but these are just some ways that I have been thinking about this. And so in conclusion, I want us to think about these last few points. One, I hope I've been able to show why it looks like the medium really is the message or the metaphor, as Postman says. And I think that we need to reflect more on the incarnation itself as the medium of the embodied word, because I think it's significant that the word became flesh and not digital. He came to be an embodied community with people. One of the things we've seen with digital medias and especially with social media and these online communities is people are the loneliest they've ever been in their life. They're not around their friends more. They're not around their families more. They're not around their church families more. They spend more time online than they do today than they do with their friends in person. That is a very highly discussed data point and a lot of social stuff I've been seeing recently. Second, I think we need to realize that if the purpose of digital technologies and digital medias is convenience, we need to remember there's a very inconvenient cost of discipleship. And that convenience cannot be what drives the way we do ministry, and it cannot be what drives what we're trying to push people towards. And then last, I think we need to really think about what it looks like to live as future new creations in the present day. One of the things I'm quite confident about is nobody is scrolling Instagram in the new creation. I'm also confident that we're not watching televised football or sports on in the new creation. As I'm thinking about what do I think will be happening in the new creation, all of of perfectness of the perfection of truth, goodness, and beauty, it's not the things that we typically think about we do with digital entertainment. So that makes me ask the question, if who we are or who we will be is to be determining who we are today, maybe that should impact how we're using these things today and what we're finding as sources of leisure and entertainment. So again, there's a lot of topics crammed into this, but this is my first attempt at trying to organize and formalize some of these thoughts that I've been having on this because I do think they are significant in how we think about ministry. And I don't know. Maybe it's time we start to take more ministries offline because that's what's actually conducive to character formation and discipleship cultivation rather than trying to outsource it online. And yeah, I'll just go ahead and stop it there.
I suspect there's some, yeah, you've been provocative and, let's go at it. I suspect there's a conversation to follow, Michael.
I did, the timeliness here is amazing. I had over coffee in the flesh this morning with one of my mentees a discussion about what does rest look like and how much does
Mhm.
always listening to something on YouTube get in the way of resting ever or Sabbathing. But yeah, you know, you brought up the word became flesh and not digital. Um, do you see any relation on that? Like the word became flesh and not papyrus or a written manuscript, that
Yeah, I do.
Jesus is not to us like the Quran is to Muslims, you know.
Correct. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Again, written things are good things, just like
Hmm.
digital things are. They can be good things when used properly and in the right order. But I do think that it's significant that the divine Logos himself, when he becomes incarnate, it's not in the written word, it's in flesh.
Hmm.
And it's because we are not created. I know I struggle with this, and if we're intellectuals, I think we've probably all struggled just wanting to be off in a room by ourselves with our books at times. We're just not created for that. No, like I'm created to read Postman. Why? So I can be a better force for Christ in my community,
Hmm.
not for myself and my own. Yeah, I might get some leisure and enjoyment out of it. I don't read the Metaphysics and the Tripersonal God by Bill Hasker for the sake of just my own enjoyment. I do that so I can help cultivate more people into the image of Jesus. Again, we use and these are technologies. These are mediums too. They
Hmm.
have a place and they have a role. Certain things, certain mediums are not good mediums for certain things. An academic paper is not a good way for me to tell my wife I love her. Doing the dishes is a great medium of me telling my wife I love her, right? And so that's what I'm
Yeah.
I'm thinking of. And you talked about when you were getting coffee with your student. There was something you said that made me think about on YouTube. So one of the things, it's not Postman, maybe it's Barry, I forget who it is, talks about one of the things we've seen as a result too of our digital technologies and entertainment is the constant overstimulation. When's the
Hmm.
last time you cut grass without headphones? I mean, I recently started forcing myself to do it because I realized something. There's something restful about it. We often tend to think, okay, I listen to headphones, I have this playing to make the work go by faster. But we often forget work was never a curse. Toiling with
Hmm.
the earth is a curse. Work was giving as a blessing before the fall. Adam and Eve were working. Work is a blessing, and work can be a medium of rest. Psychologists will often differentiate between what they call active and passive rest. And as far as what helps people feel restored and rejuvenated, passive rest actually doesn't contribute that much to it. So like vegging out in front of the television, passive rest is just where you are completely passive in how you interact with the leisure. You're just receiving the leisure as opposed to engaging in it. You know what actually shows people getting more rest or feeling more rejuvenated? Being on their hands and knees working on a garden,
Hmm.
push mowing the yard, pressure washing a driveway, going for a walk or camping, reading a book, something where you have to be engaged to create the leisure, creating art, producing art, playing a musical instrument. Those things where you're actively engaged, active rest, actually impacts how you feel rejuvenated. Passive rest isn't doing it. Actually, passive rest contributes far more to anxiety and stress. Studies show. It's really fascinating.
Much of what you're talking about here strikes me as the kind of stuff that we talk about in reference to the contemplative life and the
Yes.
rediscovery contemplation in our generation, particularly among those of us who had not that for the evangelical tradition and others, so that had not been part of it is really what's here. The question is, I guess, the diagnosis. Is the advent of digital media the cause of our non-contemplative kind of culture, or is it merely the means by which we are expressing that? Would we be that way if were this technology not available to us? I
Yeah.
don't know. I'm of two
Um,
minds on
I,
that. But my co-pastor and I, we preach from post every Sunday, so we are definitely not in a speeded up kind of mode. But we live stream. because there are people who are not able to be there. And so it's this kind of, how do we do this the long form, but in a way that provides access, in much the way that I'll finish with this. That one of the arguments I use sometimes with my students and congregations is that the New Testament epistles were distance technology.
Mhm.
You could not be fully embodied or incarnate. Paul could not be with the Philippians, but
Right.
he could connect with them over distance. And
Yep.
we have different technology by which we do that. In fact, maybe they're better because at least we're face to face.
Mhm.
I don't know.
Yeah, so I would say no, it's not itself a cause of the non of the kicking it, or I'll call it anti-intellectualism because I'm having trouble saying non-contemplativeness. I'll say anti-intellectualism because that's always existed. Going all the way back to Socrates, that's always existed. I think we have a fallen condition that makes us predisposed to it. However, when we keep overloading ourselves with things that are meant to contribute to efficiency and convenience, and we start pouring entertainment in that to get us to buy the things. Again, if you didn't have if computer games had never been invented, computers never would have sold like they did. That's just a fact of the matter. You create them and you say, "Oh, look how fun this can be," to where people want them. And what happens? So you still have people who want to be intellectual, who are sloths or lazy by nature. I tend to be one of those. So some of that spiritual fruit I'm trying to cultivate is not being a sloth and being more active, for example. But when we live in a culture, a technocracy or a technopoly, to where you can no longer, where these are things that are going to help us be sloths ultimately, and you can't imagine life without them, it feeds the problem. Does that make sense? It's like seeing someone who's like, "Oh, I'm aware that alcoholism is bad." And I'm like, "Yeah, look at this bottle of whiskey. Boom. Oh, look at this bottle of rum." I just keep putting more and more of it in front of them. At some point, someone's going to break. And I see it kind of like that. As fallen creatures, we have a disposition to be slothful. And what I see sometimes is that technology, the way it's being put in front of us, because I think it's being put in front of us in inappropriate ways and in inappropriate locales of life. If you ever, I can't hold my phone because it's being my camera right now, but if you ever want to find the most anxiety inducing form of rest that I've ever experienced, turn your cell phone completely off for a whole day. I don't mean put it on do not disturb. Turn it off. Take the battery out, whatever, to where someone actually cannot reach you. Because what the first time I did this, I was stressed out, thinking, "Oh my gosh, what if there's an emergency? What if a student needs me?" To which all of a sudden it's like the Holy Spirit hit me. I didn't design you for everyone in the world to have unmediated, constant access to you. I don't know that we're going to have cell phones in the new creation. Now I'm still going to have one because I have a kid and I need to track him, right? So again, there's benefits, there's goods for them, but there's also inappropriate uses. Cell phones are great. Smartphones, I'm not convinced they're as great. I don't think it's good that our employers feel like that they can send us an email and that we can respond almost instantly throughout all the day, even on our days off. Because here's the thing, most of us, if you're anything like me, if you see that little red notification button, you cannot ignore it. Guess who knows that? The psychologists who consulted on the development of the technology. They know that. They're telling people how to get people hooked and roped in. So again, it's about asking the question of the proper role and function of the technology in ministry. Um, One of the things I mentioned this since I'm talking about phones and screens. I mentioned earlier the possibility of eliminating screens and QR codes from churches. I mean, we've designed, and I think this goes hand in hand. I'm not trying to step on toes, but I think this goes hand in hand with some of the seeker sensitive culture of, "Oh, look how easy it is to tithe. Scan this QR code and send your tithe in. Missed last week's sermon, scan this QR code and get it. Can't see the pastor that well? Don't worry about scooting up closer. Look at the screen." But here's the problem. Most of us associate screens with work and labor. There are things that drain us and de-energize us. And more times than not, people don't even realize that they need a break from looking at the screens. They need to look at real people in real time. So at our little church plant, we can do this because we're a small mega church, 6 people. Um, but there's no need for a screen. We have pew Bibles, we have pew books of common prayer. I tell people the page number, even when they get the screens and projectors put up, we don't plan to use them. We don't have QR codes because for an hour and a half, we want you to be able to step into the space, worship the Lord, focus on the Lord, and close the world out. Turn the phone, you can turn the phone off because guess what? You don't need it. There's no reason you need the phone to engage in worship. So now I am using a kind of technology, the printed word, but I've discovered the printed word doesn't create the anxiety and the stress that the digital word does. So it becomes a way of allowing people to actually rest and experience Sabbath. Now, I don't have actual quantitative data to support that particular point, but I had noticed that because I had someone comment on it. I love that we have the physical prayer book because I never need to pull out my phone. It gives me a break from my phone. That was the day that it resonated with me. I think people are starving to get away from their phones sometimes because I don't think we are created to be at the world's beck and call 24/7. Um, so yeah, that's and again, this is not me taking a definitive position on these things. This is my attempt to formulate these things, to think cohesively with them, and I'm inviting y'all to really think with me. If you think I'm ridiculous, I'm crazy, you can tell me that. I'm perfectly okay with that. You wouldn't be the first person today to tell me that. My wife tells me that every day before she goes out to work. It's okay. I'm used to it at this point.
Well,
Michael.
there are multiple legislatures who are agreeing with you. They just put a limit on social media for kids in Virginia. Utah has put controls on social media that only parents are allowed to override so kids can be on it. Our own school district has said children may not have phones with them during the day in class. They all have to be in lockers. So I, y- you might not be crazy. There are a lot of people who are making that effort right now to get it out of the heads of kids. But they're leaving it in the heads of us parents. So I don't know how much good it will do if only the kids are doing better. It's yeah.
Well, one of the things it's going to depend on, and I think parents can be a part to it. I mean, we're still fighting it. That fight is becoming harder because my son's about to turn 3. My son has never watched an episode of anything on an iPad currently. We are fighting the urge to, the sake of our own leisure, just make him shut up and give him the iPad. Like we're fighting that. No, it's not always fun to want to get down on the ground and play with trucks or go out in the mud and play and scoop up the mud with his toy excavator because he's into everything that's kind of an excavator. But you know what it is beneficial for? It's much more beneficial for him. And I think there is a kind of presencing that we get from embodied interaction, embodied mediums that we miss with digital medias. Again, it's better, I think, in many ways. Tony mentioned that, hey, this is better because we're face to face, right? And in that sense, I agree. But also, there's one thing I see Zoom pulling away from, and that's cultivating the virtue of patience. To think about a written letter, when you write a letter, you have to wait for that response. There is a benefit. Not, I'm not saying that outweighs this. Again, you're not going to see me tell any of my students I don't Zoom. You can write me a letter and send it snail mail. I'm never going to do that. That'd be silly. But you get what I'm saying is that, hey, all of these mediums that we look at as outdated or old, well, they actually had a lot of benefits. We just didn't analyze it and think about it quite that way. Um, this is something that I never used to think about until I got into pastoral ministry. And I started seeing, um, I just started hearing people and seeing people um, and the struggles they have with just everything revolves around digital media. One of the things that's encouraging is seeing actually how there is a trend in Gen Z revolting against it right now. Not only, for example, we're seeing Gen Z much more than millennials desiring to unplug. Gen Z have cultivated this phrase. I love it. Maybe y'all have heard it. It's called touch grass. Have y'all heard that? Yeah, it's this idea of get offline and get in tune with reality. Touch grass. This isn't the world. And I'm trying to help my 24-year-old cousin see, hey, the person you're calling your best friend that you don't even know their name, you just know a user handle, that's not your best friend. I don't even know if we can call it a friend. You don't even know that's a human being. That's a predator for all you know. That's a bot. That's an AI bot for all you know. You just don't know who's on the other end of that screen. You see the picture they've let you. You've never video chatted with them. You don't know this person. Um, there is again there is if you're someone nefarious, it's harder to cover up all of your nefarious ticks when you're in person versus online and have an avatar. Also, I didn't even get to touch on how, like with Twitter and things, we see the proliferation of anonymous accounts, people who are too. This is going to sound emotionally charged, but I don't mean it to be that way. People who are too cowardly to say what they want to say under their real name and with their own face, they'll create a fake one and create an anonymous account because they're afraid of losing their job. To which I want to say, well, then maybe you shouldn't say what you want to say. Or if you do need to say it, if maybe your job is being immoral, maybe you should, maybe to some extent, we should actually consider, hey, either keeping quiet to provide for our families, or we should consider being bold and saying it. But I think that if it's not careful, the ability to subscribe to anonymity has been exacerbated by things like social media. And I think that that cultivates another vicious fruit, not a virtuous fruit.
Uh, Thanks, Andrew, for your presentation. Wanted to just say real quick, there's a good resource for people to look at if you're unfamiliar. I'm actually one of our resident Zoomers in the group,
Mm-hmm.
and the resource is called Digital Cocaine. I forget who the author
Cool.
is, Michael something, but they've done a lot of research around the effect of the technology on kids, specifically. And yeah, we're children now, of course, especially the younger ones with potentially millennial parents, those are more of your iPad kids than some of your Gen Zers. But um, yeah, the effect that, are the different games that are created on phones, for instance, and iPads, actually have mirror effects neurologically that cocaine actually does. And so and you're right, like the psychologists have designed it to do such, who consult on the marketing. The marketers are excellent psychologists. But even, some of I work with a lot of older volunteers, and something that I've tried to help them with, because we have a lot of technology we need to use to try to reach our clients in a pregnancy center. And so really we can only reach them via text, for instance. That's the majority of
Mm-hmm.
the times, but we try to cultivate like a digital hygiene.
Mm-hmm.
And try to, like, hey, your phone's like a mess, it's disorganized, and that's not helping you like use the tool. And in fact, when you're disorganized in that way, it's just going to lead you to kind of down all the rabbit trails of being distracted. Like, get on my phone to jump on the Zoom session. Why am I on my email? I don't know. I'm going back to the Zoom session, whatever. But anyway, I appreciate a lot of your suggestions. I was wondering as well if there's such a way to cultivate this like virtual virtue, if there is such a thing, or if the virtue is only such that you can withdraw from this thing. It's kind of like, I don't know if there's parallels to be drawn with, of course, alcohol, or gosh, cigars or food, right? Maybe they're good
Mm-hmm.
things. Like food specifically is a good thing, but you can't have too much in excess. So yeah, I don't know. Is withdrawal the only way to be virtuous in a virtual space, or are there other ways? So thank you.
Um, Possibly. Um, think of it like carbohydrates. Like, hey, we all need a little bit of it, but we all don't need to eat nothing but carbs all day because it'll be bad for us. So I don't want to say it's withdrawal. Maybe mitigation is what I'm thinking. Like you said, like a digital hygiene almost, or digital nutrition. Um, I don't know. I don't think it's withdrawal again, and I don't, and I haven't thought through every medium, but it's, hey, maybe we think through like how we use the medium. Again,
Right.
for example, um, Amazon is hugely convenient for me, who buys someone who buys a lot of books. They're affordable, and I get them in 2 days. But there's a downside to that. I'm not helping anyone in my community flourish when I buy from Amazon. So now I think, now that makes Amazon evil? No, I'm not saying that at all. There are some times like, hey, financial situations where we're forced to order from that. It's something great to have. Um, but I think there's better alternatives. Sometimes it's just, hey, we start to think about how can I use this well? And again, when you ask about can you cultivate like a virtual virtue, I think what we need to do is we need to ask ourselves, what are the Christian virtues? And how do we see the virtual world contributing to that? And we don't need to think about that necessarily in the here and now. How do we see it contributing that in the long term? Which is hard to do because the technology changes about every 2 years. It's very difficult. A great book collection of essays that I highly recommend. Not all of the essays are great, but overall it's a great collection. Book written in the 1920s by a bunch of Southern elite academics called "I'll Take My Stand." And it was on the detriments of the Industrial Revolution. For culture, what we're going to see the diminishment of work-leisure balance, which, by the way, the digital thing has ruined even more, I think, as you mentioned, just wanting to check your email while you're on the Zoom session, right? It's ruined work-leisure balance. Art and the humanities and all these other things, they talked about how the Industrial Revolution would be negative for all these aspects of life. 99% of it came true. And I'm looking at that, I'm thinking, yeah, I think the same thing's happening with a lot. So I don't know the answer to cultivating a virtual virtue. Maybe. I think in some ways, yeah, I don't think it's wrong to have a Facebook account, but don't be anonymous, for example. There's also something about social media seems to allow people, maybe it's because of the anonymity, to just say things online they would never say to a person's face. I don't think that's a good thing. Because again, that's either a bad thing in one of two ways. It means, hey, you're really a jerk in real life and you just don't feel like you can be that way in real life, or you're a coward in real life. It's one of the two, right? There's a lot of things that's being symbolized in that. Sometimes it's like, oh, yeah, you don't have the courage to say that because you shouldn't say that. Again, there's just a lot of things. I don't have like a one solution to, and I don't know if there is a single solution to, because again, I'm not even saying that technology is the problem. It's technology versus secular worldview versus consumer mentality versus a sinful disposition towards sloth and laziness. There's so many things that feed into it.
I just was enjoying the conversation, wasn't paying attention to the time, and I just looked at the time, and we do usually have a commitment here to try to finish up.
Oh, sorry about that.
No, it's a compliment, Andrew. You provoked
Oh.
a good discussion. I suspect those who are watching this later are going to regret the fact that they're not here to engage you in this. Maybe it's the kind of thing that says we need to talk more. Maybe we'll have you back at some point in time. Says let's take
Well,
this
thank you.
a little bit further. But I think that's the primary point of doctoral education: to provoke the mind, to provoke the spirit, to provoke the imagination. And doesn't mean we always have to agree, or we can come to a consensus or a full knowledge of it. But to get us looking at some of those things really, really matter.
Well, one thing I want to leave y'all with too that I've started doing with my master's and my I don't have any undergraduate students currently, but I was doing my master's student. I'm doing another mentor program I work with. Doctoral students are different, but masters and undergraduates, I make them handwrite their assignments, and then scan them and turn them in. One, I don't have to worry about AI, but number two, here's another reason. It takes longer, and you have to think a lot harder about what you're going to write down because you don't get a backspace key when you're handwriting. You have an ink pen, and you have to scribble it out and make a mess. So it actually forces my students to slow down and think more carefully, and it actually makes them better thinkers. I've seen some interesting studies on that, how on handwriting helps people retain better and helps to make a clearer thinker than typing. Again, doctoral students, I don't have that rule with. That's just not feasible for a doctoral student. But again, I think it's one of those things that we're losing also in education systems when we're already kids aren't being taught how to write in cursive, which I think is a shame, but also their handwriting isn't. I'm wondering how much longer until people don't need to know how to write. They just need to know how to type or text. And I think isn't it fascinating that people used to rob banks so their kids can learn how to read and write. And now one of the things we're taking away from kids today is reading and writing.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Sorry.
I call this to a close.
Yeah, that's
but
fine.
Obviously, let things continue to stir. Blessings on you all. I see some applause.
Oh, well, thank you.
Beautiful day. Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate it.
Let me know, Tony, when you have this the recording posted, and I'd like to post it on my YouTube channel for my students and others as well. Sure.
Thanks.
Thank you.